Welcome to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Come with us as we connect the pro-life movement's past to present, uncover hidden or forgotten history, and its connections to the battle still raging today. Now, here's our host, Danielle Underwood.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Today, Seth Dillon, CEO of the Babylon Bee, joins me in the podcast studio. Welcome, Seth. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we loved having you at our banquets recently, and we were excited to have you as our featured speaker. You brought a great message to the people of Kansas. And so normally I begin our show by kind of giving a full intro of the guest who's with me that day. But, you know, I feel like you're such a vocal public figure, and lots of our listeners will be familiar with what you're saying in the public sphere right now, and with your work and your team's work at the Babylon Bee. And so I was hoping to start our conversation just by learning more about you personally. I look at you as a figure that is a person who is fearless. You're very courageous in what you're doing right now and what you have been doing for quite a while. And I'm just wondering about what formed you as a person, your life experiences that turned you into this fearless truth teller that you are, and a prophet.
Very generous and kind of you to say that. So how far back do you want to go?
As far back as you want to go.
January 5th, 1983, I was born. That makes me 41 years old. I now need lumbar support when I fly long distances because my lower back starts to hurt. So,
okay. You're so
getting
ancient.
old.
You're so ancient. We're not going to talk about my age. You keep going.
So I still feel young on the inside. I was born and raised in a Christian home, very fortunately. I don't have one of those dramatic conversion stories, where I was an ardent atheist and then became confronted with the truth and couldn't deny it and fell on my knees and, begged God to forgive me for fighting against him, like a C.S. Lewis type conversion or something like that, the most reluctant convert. I was raised in a Christian home under Christian teaching. My dad, my mom actually converted my dad from some sort he was dabbling in a number of different things. He actually was going down the path to Mormonism, actually. But she convinced him that Christianity was true. And he ended up going to Bible college and studying to become a pastor. And so I grew up in the church with my dad pastoring church. So I was in the pews and in youth group and Sunday school and all of that from a very early age. And it's one of the reasons why I think the Bee appealed to me so much when the Bee came across my radar, because I saw, I didn't start the Bee. Actually, we'll get into that, but that's one of the misconceptions, is that I'm a founder of the Babylon Bee. I didn't found it. I found it, but I didn't start it.
Gotcha.
And I found it because it was coming across my feed with jokes like, Holy Spirit unable to move through congregation as fog machine breaks, and it's this, picture of a cloudy auditorium, so cloudy you can barely make out the stage, and it's, and it was just these kind of inside jokes that you get if you're in the church and evangelical Christian culture, and so I thought that was really refreshing and funny to see. Especially since it wasn't cheesy. It was genuinely funny and self-deprecating, which I also thought was very healthy.
Yes.
The church itself needs laughter. The church needs to be able to examine itself and its own motivations and some of the things that it gets wrong and some of the hypocrisy and, just confront some of that in an honest way, but a gentle way, So all of that was really, really cool to me. And I think it appealed to me so much because of my background, having grown up in the church and having some insight into those things. And so I really had wished when I came across the Bee that I had been the one to start that site. But I'll try to think of what details to give you. But I was as a teenager, really dedicated my life to God. Went off to a Christian college, started studying apologetics so I could be equipped to deal with arguments against Christianity, and got real deep into those waters. And It's very enriching, by the way, when you start studying apologetics and you go beyond just the surface level. I was always taught this, so I'm just going to believe it. But why do I believe that this is true, and how can I defend it and give an answer to people who come to me with objections, even really hard objections? And so I started studying that, which I spent years studying Christian apologetics. And I think that really equipped me, because that was really the first thing that I studied that got me into some of the pro-life stuff too eventually. But it was one of the first things that I studied where I started engaging with people who disagreed with me and defending what I believe and why I believe it. And you have to be equipped to do that. You can't, if you go out unprepared to do that, you're certainly not going to be courageous, because you're going to be afraid that you're going to be made to look like a fool. And you certainly don't want to step in it that way, and that doesn't do anything to convince anybody that what you're saying is true. If anything, it convinces them the other way, that you just have nothing to say. Whenever somebody gets out there and kind of fumbles the ball and doesn't know what to say, there is some damage that's done there because of that. And I think that's why it's important that we all, whatever position is that we're going out there to defend, we take the time to learn how to defend it, be articulate, coherent, have answers to the objections.
Prepare.
So
Yes.
Preparation is huge, because and a great example of how necessary that is because you never know what situation you're walking into or what opportunities you're going to have. I was on, and this may be something we talk about a little later, so don't let me get into it too soon. But when I was on Joe Rogan's podcast a little over a year ago, maybe going on 2 years ago, I was not expecting to talk about abortion on that podcast. It wasn't a plan, but I was prepared to, because I knew what I believed and why I believed it. And I think it's important to be prepared so that when you end up in a situation like that, who knows, you might end up on Joe Rogan's podcast one day, and abortion may come up. Can you defend the pro-life position? Are you able to in those situations instead of getting squishy and soft and not standing firm on anything, So from an early age, I had an interest in really determining not just what I believe and clinging to it, but why I believe it and being willing and able to defend it. And that led into some of the pro-life studying that I did, reading up on that issue and getting a solid handle on that. But I went to a Christian college, Palm Beach Atlantic, and in Palm Beach. I met my wife shortly after that. My first job out of school was at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, of all places.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, right? I needed a job, and they were hiring, so I took the job. I ended up meeting my wife there, though, because she got in an accident on the highway, and she needed a rental car. And she wasn't even old enough to rent a car on her own. She was 19. I was 21 at the time. She needed a rental car, and her insurance company was paying for it because her car was damaged. And came into my branch, and I rented her a car. And later on that evening, she actually asked me out.
Oh.
So that was kind of cool. Well, for one thing, we met because she's a bad driver, which is
funny. I hope that hasn't continued to be part of the marriage.
Her car's in the shop right now, actually. Even funnier though is that Enterprise's tagline is "We'll pick you up." So I thought that was kind of appropriate too.
Funny.
So
only she picked you up. So
yeah, that's true.
Backwards.
Yeah, you're right. It is a little backwards, but still funny. And we've been together now. We've been married 14 years. Have 2 young boys, 8 and 10. So, yeah, I don't know if I left anything out there that you want to dig into, but that's kind of the rough sketch of where I come from.
Yeah. So I kind of made some assumptions that maybe your family was just very intent on instilling courage in you. It sounds like, and maybe that was also the case, but it sounds like it was really just you digging into the why and really not just surface level, but drilling down deep. So you really hit the foundation, the rock. You hit it. My
parents were great examples, though. So my parents, just so you know, like a little bit about who they are. I mean, my dad being a pastor is getting up in front of a congregation every week and preaching a sermon and trying to communicate biblical truth to his congregation and shepherd them. And there's a lot that goes into being a pastor that happens outside of the sanctuary. There's so much that, with weddings and funerals and hospital visits and ministering to people all over the place. There's a lot that goes on there, and it takes a lot of courage and conviction to be out there and dealing with all that you have to deal with as a pastor, and then to be a supportive pastor's wife that as my mom was, but also my mom. My mom is one of those people who, if she's on a flight, like when I'm on a flight, I have my headphones in, I'm reading a book, I'm working, I'm trying not to talk to anyone or be bothered, or maybe I'm sleeping or something. My mom will become best friends with whoever's sitting next to her. And by the end of the flight, she's praying over someone and hugging them, and they're in tears, and then they stay in communication forever after that. It's like,
wow.
She has this amazing gift for just connecting with people, finding out what their needs are, and offering them something, even if it's just an ear, to be a good listener. And so she is just such an empathetic person and a compassionate person, a loving person. And so, but my dad is out there, constantly looking for opportunities to witness to people and share his testimony with people, and to foster the relationships, cultivate relationships with people so that he can reach them with the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so my parents are just evangelizing all over the place, and in a very loving and non-confrontational way. It's just developing relationships, and then getting to know people, and then hitting them with the truth and God's grace and that message. And so I had that example in my life from a very early age. So it wasn't as if it was just all on my own. I decided, I want to try to advance the truth fearlessly myself. I had a great example in both of my parents for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you being a PK, that was you being a pastor's kid, that was a really beautiful upbringing for you.
Yeah, and that can go one of two ways. As
exactly.
There's
Right. That's why I asked it.
A lot of PKs who rebel, and I, you do see kind of the dark underbelly of things in being behind the scenes in the church and everything. And so, it can go the other way, where people are driven away from the church and organized religion and things like that. So I'm very fortunate to have stayed on, I think, the path.
Yeah. It's super interesting. So I think, a lot of people who follow the Babylon Bee, they'd probably be very interested. So you started to talk about how you first found the Babylon Bee and got involved. And I know your brother is also part of it. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a family thing. So there's also a humorous vein in your family that you guys must have, just really fun family gatherings. What was that? How did you decide the day you decided I'm gonna buy this and I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna even just blow it out even more? We're going big with this.
Well, I didn't want to buy it initially.
Wow.
I did have that thought. I wish I had started this, but I reached out to Adam. His name is Adam Ford, the guy that actually launched the Bee in early 2016, and I asked him if he was looking for investment or anything. Was he hoping to try to grow this and turn it into a business? And more of just offering, how can I help? I'd love to see this grow. How can I help? Do you need help? And I explained a little bit about who I was and what my background was, and he had no idea who I was. I wasn't a public figure at that point because I hadn't run the Babylon Bee yet. Mm-hmm. So
you must have not been an enterprise rent-a-car at that point.
I was not at that point. This was 2017 or late 2017 or early 2018, and he was kind of dismissive because he was in the middle of working out a deal with the guys over at the Daily Wire. They were looking at taking over the Bee early on. Yeah,
okay.
So they had their eyes on it too, and but that ended up not working out. And so he came back to me and he was like, "Look, I don't want an investor. I actually want to sell this thing." I'm one of his primary concerns was how big tech was using their power to control what you're allowed to say. They were fact checking, not just news media reports, but also jokes. And he was very concerned about where censorship was going and whether or not we'd even have a platform in the near future. And so he didn't want to deal with that problem and have to worry about the fact that his livelihood was being controlled by these tyrants who hate him and his worldview. Yeah. And so he was very concerned about censorship. And so he was ready to exit very early on. He was like, if this blows up and becomes something, it's basically going to be on thin ice all the time, and you never know when it's going to crash through. So I did reluctantly agree to buy it. I met with him, and we had a beer and talked and got to know each other a little bit and told our stories, brought each other up to speed on who we were and what our backgrounds were. And we liked each other and hit it off, and I did end up making him an offer. And so, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. The whole funny thing. I mean, I had an interest in humor. I love humor myself. I love satire. I dabbled in it a little bit, early on. I almost got kicked out of college, actually, because I was sending some satire around the school anonymously, making fun of the school, and they found out it was me.
Oh
and
my gosh. You've
and
always
so-
liked to stir the pot, huh?
Yeah, I've been getting in trouble with that for a long time. It goes way back to my college days. And so the idea of actually doing that professionally was really intriguing to me, because one of the things that I actually wanted to be when I grew up was a writer. But I never knew how I could possibly make any money writing. Like, it's you can have a job, but you're not going to be super successful just writing unless you happen to be a Stephen King or something like that, who's just got #1 best-selling novels on the shelves all the time. And there's very few people who make it to that level as a writer. And so I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I should probably just get a business degree or something more generic, and and then I can find a path that way. And the way God works things together is kind of interesting, because I ended up getting a business degree, and now I run a business that allows me to write and tell jokes and speak and do all of this fun stuff. So I've kind of combined it all together now at this point. The satire I was doing in college and almost got me kicked out. I'm now doing that on a much larger scale and professionally, and getting in trouble for it in other ways.
And you could think, maybe there would have been potential. Like, you could have been writing for this Saturday Night Live or something.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it didn't have the right. It wouldn't be the humor you would want to write, because
Right.
the kind of humor you wanted to write really didn't exist outside
There was
of Babylon
no market.
Bee.
There was no market for that. The Babylon Bee created that. There was no site that you could go work for.
Total vacuum.
Yeah.
And you guys have filled it
Yeah.
incredibly. Yeah. Okay. So can you give us the short version for people who maybe are just now learning about the Babylon Bee? There's a whole group of people who absolutely follows the Babylon Bee regularly. We read your stuff every day.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole group of people who are unfamiliar with Babylon Bee. So do you want to tell the story about how, just kind of that pivotal day, what it was like in your office among your team when you guys got banned by Twitter, when you guys got locked out of your account?
Well, did you want me to tell a little about what the Babylon Bee is and what we do
first?
first?
I guess we better do that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, for those who aren't familiar with it, we do news satire, which means we basically write parody of the news. Adopting the tone and style of a news publication. We write funny fake stories, similar to real news stories, with a point usually, to kind of mock something, point out a double standard, highlight an absurdity, and just make people laugh. So there's a couple elements to it. You're trying to entertain people and make them laugh. You're also trying to make them think and confront your own side, the other side, with some truth. Satire does that extremely effectively. So, and it's an age-old thing. It's not like The Onion started it. Satire's been around for a long time. So, but The Onion was probably the most notable satire publication. It was the biggest one in the world for many years. We've passed them up in traffic and engagement now, which is cool. So now the #1 satire site out there right now is a Christian news satire site, which I think is pretty remarkable.
Cool.
But we've been doing that, since Adam started it in 2016 and I took it over in 2018. News satire has been our core thing. That's the main thing that we do. We've branched out into some video now and done some sketch comedy and things like that. But the incident that got us kicked off of Twitter was where we responded to a real news headline that was out there in USA Today, where they had named Rachel Levine, this transgender health admiral in the Biden administration. USA Today had named Rachel Levine their pick for Woman of the Year, or one of their picks for Women of the Year, and which feels like parody on its own. It's a joke that a man is being named Woman of the Year. I mean, at what point in the past, if you could bring anybody from the past to the future and they could see that was happening, they wouldn't believe it.
No.
They wouldn't believe that it was
You're
even
so
possible that anybody would go along with this or take it seriously. Even people from 20 years ago, even not that long ago. So we had no idea really how to satirize that. We ended up just telling a joke where we said Rachel Levine was our pick for Man of the Year, to kind of be provocative and just to throw the truth in everybody's face and say, we reject that this is a woman. Mm-hmm. We see this person as a man, because, by the way, they are. To be a man is to be male. This is a male person. So we just told the truth, as we're supposed to do. And of course, Twitter didn't like that very much. This is pre-Elon Twitter. He hadn't taken Twitter over yet. And they had very strict policies against they had a whole hateful conduct policy that involved misgendering. So you can't misgender somebody. I think it's misgendering when a male person refers to himself as a woman. But apparently it's misgendering when you get that wrong, when you don't do what they want you to say. So we misgendered Rachel Levine by saying that Rachel Levine was a man, and that was considered hateful conduct, and we were given a choice. We could delete that tweet and take it down. And if we did delete it, then we would regain access to our account. And if we didn't delete it, we would remain locked out of our account indefinitely. So we knew, by the way, when we told the joke that this might happen, because we were already dancing around this stuff and having internal conversations about what jokes can we make, what jokes can't we make. The comedian's job when you're writing jokes, what you want to be thinking about, the primary thing that should be going through your mind is this joke funny? Is it making a point? Is there truth to it, and is it funny? But now added to that, you have to also be thinking, well, is it telling a truth that's going to get me in trouble? Am I going to get censored for this? Am I going to get deplatformed? Am I going to put the whole business at risk if I tell this joke? That is a new question that you have to ask yourself as you're writing jokes. And it puts you in a really weird situation as a humorist or satirist to have to be thinking in those terms and not just about whether or not it's funny or making a point that's worth making. Yeah. And I've always encouraged my staff, to, of course, if there's something like that, bring it to me and let's talk about it. But don't censor yourself and refrain from publishing these jokes just because you're afraid it's going to hurt the business. Like if it's a joke that needs to be told, let's tell it. And in fact, I think the ones that they don't want you to tell are the ones that we really need to be telling. Those are the jokes that push back on these narratives that need to be challenged. So I feel a real moral obligation to push back in those situations and tell the jokes that you're not supposed to tell. And so we did have a conversation internally where we joked a little bit about whether or not we should, this was going to get us kicked off of Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And I do think, and I mentioned this in the talk that I gave, those are those common thoughts that go through people's minds. It's not just comedians who deal with that, but everyone who uses social media at some point thinks, should I say this? I might get censored if I say this, whether it's about COVID or whatever it is. Yeah. There may be topics that you're wading into where you're like, I probably shouldn't say anything. I'm going to get penalized. I'm going to get dinged. I'm going to get fact checked. I'm going to get deplatformed. And they end up just censoring themselves instead of saying what they really think. And I call that soft censorship. It's not them taking down your content. It's them intimidating you into biting your own tongue and just never speaking in the first place.
Yes.
And I think that's...
Can I interject for just a second? I was just going to say, I think not just on social media, I think that so many of us are self-censoring just in everyday life. So in people's jobs, in their conversations with their neighbors, we saw a particularly contentious amendment vote here in 2022, and I think that caused a lot of fear in some people. Can I speak with my neighbor about what I truly believe?
Right.
And I think that you make such a great point that this self-censorship has crept into a lot of our lives, both online and offline.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason that I am so fascinated by your courage and the way that you fearlessly speak the truth, because I think we have so much to learn from that. And I think if we could, it's a great segue to talk about, you brought up the ASH study in your speech for us at our banquets. And
we'll get to that in a second, but don't skip. Just to recap what happened though with that story we did not delete the joke.
Right, we didn't finish.
And we didn't delete the joke. I'll just really quickly, we didn't delete the joke. It did catch Elon's attention that we had been suspended. He was actually trying to message us and find out, were you guys actually suspended? And we couldn't respond to his message because we were locked out of our account. We refused to delete the tweet to get back into our account. So he did end up calling us. He found one of our numbers and called us and had a conversation with him. And he was, musing about the need to buy Twitter because this is ridiculous that you can't even tell jokes anymore. And so he was really worked up about how free speech is being cracked down on from the top down, and that there needs to be a free speech platform out there. One of these social media companies, by the way, Twitter's mission statement was to provide a platform for free expression without barriers. That was in their mission statement.
Wow.
And there were barriers all over the place. They baked their radical ideology into the terms of service that if you disagree with them disagree with them about what a man or a woman is, and you have biology on your side, you can still be guilty of an enforceable policy violation and be kicked off the platform. That's insane. And so, even joking about those things could get you kicked off. So Elon saw that as a major problem, and he was willing to buy the platform to fix that problem, not just for us, by the way, but for everybody who wants to be able to tell jokes and speak the truth and challenge these popular narratives, which are often just rooted in ideology and not reason or reality. And so thank you, Elon Musk, for doing that, because that was really big. And so we did get unlocked from Twitter jail 8 months later when he finally closed that deal. He took over, walked into Twitter with a sink in his hands, and sent me a message. And the message said, "Do you want the bee restored? There will be no censorship of humor," which was pretty awesome to get that message. So.
And what was it like in your? I mean, were there just cheers erupting among your team? What did that look like?
I mean, I woke up. He sent me that message at like 4 a.m. and I didn't see it until like 8 or 9 a.m. when I woke up. And I had to look again. I was like, "Is this really Elon Musk? Is it a fake account?" Because there's a lot of accounts that impersonate him. I'm like, did I really just get a DM from Elon Musk? And did he really say that? And it took a minute for me to realize this is real. He actually, he owns Twitter now, and he's going to unlock us. So yeah, it was a big deal. It was, I say Twitter jail. We weren't actually imprisoned anywhere. we were locked out of our account on principle for 8 months, and the world's richest man bailed us out. And that is its own conversation. Do we have to be dependent on benevolent billionaires to safeguard speech in this country? Is that really where we're at? And is that where we need to be at or should be? That's its own conversation. But anyway, I just wanted to get, because we had started down that story. For anyone who doesn't know that story, it did have a happy ending. Elon took it over and unlocked us, and we never had to delete the tweet. We never censored ourselves. It's still there. It's still there. The people at Twitter, the trust and safety people who wanted us to delete it, they're gone. They got fired. We're still there. The tweet's still there. So that's pretty cool.
That's justice.
Yes.
That's
but back to where we were going next.
Yeah, no, that was, I really appreciate you putting us back on track.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Yeah, I got so excited by the self-censorship stuff too, because I see so much truth in what you're telling us with that. And I think, so if you want to just kind of explain the ASH study and how that all ties into this conversation.
Yeah. So the ASH is called the ASH Conformity Study. It was a social study that was done in the 1950s with the purpose of trying to determine, and I was reminded of this just really quickly, give credit where it's due. I was having a sit down with Riley Gaines, who you may know, the swimmer.
Yes.
Who
another fearless speaker of truth.
Yeah, who's competing against Leah Thomas and James Lindsay. If you're familiar with James Lindsay, he's done a lot of work on critical theory and queer theory and all of these things, and the roots, the worldview, the philosophical underpinnings of modern wokeness and where that comes from and why it matters and how to fight back against it. He's brilliant.
Marxism.
Yeah.
Marxist guys.
Exactly. So he and Riley were sitting down with me, and we were talking about, being bold and speaking the truth boldly and how important that is. And James brought up the ASH studies, and I went back and revisited it because I don't remember learning about it in school. I don't know if you ever went over it or remember learning about it in school, but
I don't.
So the study itself the purpose of it was to determine the extent to which people will conform with the group that's around them just because everybody else is doing it, will you do it? If everybody else says that 2 and 2 makes 5, are you going to say that too, just to get along with everyone else? And these studies are fascinating because they do tend to show that our human nature is such that we are social animals, and we want to be liked. We want to get along. We don't want to be uncomfortable where we look or seem like the outlier. And we even question our own sanity in situations where we think we know what's true, but everyone else is saying something different, So the way they set it up was really interesting. In the study, they gave they had a single subject. There was only one subject each time they ran the experiment. So one person was the subject of the study when they would run it, and everybody else was kind of in on it and knew what they were trying to do here. And they gave everybody 2 cards. One card had 3 different length lines on it. So it was like a short line, a longer line, and then a longest line. And there were like A, B, and C, or 1, 2, 3. You know, like you had a reference card in the other hand, though, that had a line on it that matched one of those 3. And it's a pretty easy thing. You know, this is like kindergarten type stuff where you have a kid match the length of the lines. You know, which one does it match, A, B, or C? Very easy stuff. And it was very obvious when you looked at the two, like, because the lines were significantly different lengths. They weren't like just barely different. They were different enough that you could tell just by glancing at the 2 cards which line was the matching line. And so they had everybody go around the table one at a time and say which one it matched. And they were instructed to give the wrong answer all the way around the table. So it would be wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer. And then it would get around to the subject of the study, and they must have been sitting there like thinking to themselves, am I blind? Am I crazy? What is going on? Why does everybody think it's B when it's A? What is happening? But because everybody was giving the same answer uniformly, they felt a lot of pressure, social pressure, to go along with what they said and give the wrong answer, what everyone else was saying. And so in some cases, up to 70% of the time, these people were agreeing with the rest of the table and saying, yeah, it's B, and saying that was their answer.
Something that was clearly wrong.
Yes. And honestly, it may not have been that they were trying to be dishonest. They may have been just questioning their own perception of reality.
Yes. Am
I
losing my sanity?
Am I losing my sanity? I must be wrong here. They must be right, because there's no way that everybody's going to get this wrong, right? You could see yourself kind of questioning yourself in a situation like that. So it wasn't just about wanting to fit in. It was also, I think, about when everybody else is telling you that, you know, up is down and black is white, you can start to question whether or not you have a grip on reality, and whether or not they might actually be right. How could I possibly be the only one who sees this, right? So there was a high rate of conformity when everybody was giving the wrong answer. And I think one of the most interesting aspect of the study was when they introduced a variable where they had one other person at the table give the right answer. So this was a new when they ran the study again, they would have it go wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, and then someone would give the right answer, and then it would keep going wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer. And it would get around to the subject of the study, and they'd be looking at this, and they'd be like, well, that guy gets it, you know? There was one person here that saw what I see, and it was almost like it gave them permission. The conformity rate dropped to under 5% when you had one person at the table willing to say what was true.
Amazing.
All of a sudden, very few people, it went from most people going along with a lie, going along with what was false, to hardly anyone going along with it, just because one other person at the table was willing to say it was true. And so I think the reason I bring that up in my talks on this is that I think that the Asch conformity study illustrates, and it's an example of what we're currently experiencing in our culture, where there is a war on reality and reason and truth. We have people literally looking us straight in the face with a straight face, telling us that's a man when it's a woman, or that's a woman when it's a man. You know, men can get pregnant and chest feed, they'll tell us. They say this stuff with a straight face. They get groups of medical doctors to go along with it. You know, there's journals publishing studies, and the media is touting it, and the president is saying it, and everybody around you is in lockstep with a lie. And the pressure is on you to go along with that lie and say what they're saying. And there's even more pressure than there is in the study, because in real life, like you were saying, you know, people are afraid to speak up. It's not just that you're an outlier if you're saying something different than what everyone else is saying. There's also a penalty. The penalty for us was getting locked out of Twitter. We lost access to millions of followers and a revenue stream because we were unwilling to go along with a lie. And so there are actual penalties in your life that you can encounter if you don't conform. And so the pressure is even greater now in our culture than it was in that small study that was done where you're just sitting at a table and disagreeing with people who are sitting there with you. So I think it just illustrates the point, though, that if you are willing to say what's true, even when everyone else is pushing a lie, you will, whether you realize it or not, you will be giving other people permission to do that too. And courage in that sense, it's demonstrably contagious. It is. It will spread to other people. You will see them realize, I'm not crazy. There are other people who see the truth and reality for what it is and are willing to say it. I can say it too. That's the power of that study and what it illustrates. in my view.
Be the one.
Be the one. Be the one to stand up. Whatever your, you don't have to be. I think I get this question a lot from especially like younger people, students and young professionals. Well, I don't have a big platform. I'm not famous. I'm not wealthy. I don't, I can't buy Twitter. I don't have 1 million followers to make a point to, that doesn't really matter that much. The point is that whatever your circle of influence is, your small friend groups, your family, at your school, in your workplace, you don't have to be famous or successful or a major social media influencer to make a difference by being the one person at the table who says what's true. In the Ash conformity study, it was just a table of 10 people sitting there, and one person speaking the truth made a difference.
Wow. So let's tie that to the pro-life fight, to the pro-life movement. What you're fearless speaking about your pro-life beliefs, and you've been speaking a lot about that recently. So what would you say to the person who right now is self-censoring their own very firmly held beliefs because we know it's founded on truth? That life is precious and that every life has value. What would you say to that person?
Well, if no one is willing to, if everyone has that mentality, if you zoom out a little bit, like if we say, look, well, there might be a consequence, or I'm afraid to be an outlier, I'm afraid to push back on this stuff. If everybody had that mentality, nothing will ever change. You're never going to affect change by holding it in and not confronting these lies with the truth. When you look at the conversation around abortion and life, it's the same thing as what we're dealing with. In our case where we got locked out, it was the gender ideology stuff, right? That's one of the big things right now. But you have this problem in the abortion conversation where there's misinformation everywhere, disinformation. This is propaganda. These are lies that are being told. We're describing abortion as a healthcare procedure. It's a procedure that intentionally ends a living human. It ends their life. And we're calling it healthcare. We're using misleading language, euphemisms. And so these lies have to be confronted. If they're never dealt with, they will prevail. And so in order for the truth to prevail, people have to be willing to say what's true. And I tell people when they ask me, I'd be the only one who is standing up and doing that. And so, that could have a consequence for me, and I might lose my job if I speak out on this issue, and I have a family to feed and whatever. And those are, they're very serious concerns. People have to weigh these things when they're trying to decide what do they talk about and how candid do they get in these conversations. And I try to tell them, I'm like, look, I understand what you're saying, but it's because everybody is thinking in exactly the terms that you're thinking in right now that the environment is like that. They're actually in your workplace. I'm sure there are a ton of people who agree with you, but they're all thinking and feeling the same way that you are. And maybe the way to change that is for you to be the one to stand up and be the one to speak out, and you will embolden some of them. And then the next thing you know, what's your employer going to do? Fire half the company? And there will be a penalty. There will be a price to pay in a lot of these cases. I do think that sometimes, in our case, the effort to suppress our voice has only amplified it. It's backfired on them.
Good point. I love that.
And that happens a lot. It's called the Streisand effect. That's the formal name for it. And there's a whole story behind why it's called that. But it is true that oftentimes when people say things that they're not supposed to say, the powers that be get really worked up about it and try to stamp out their voice or censor them or whatever. And that draws so much more attention to not just that individual, but the message that individual is sharing. And so it actually amplifies the truth when they're trying to suppress the truth. And you see this even with the political stuff that happens, like the Hunter Biden laptop story, right? I think the effort to censor that story made that an even bigger story. And they amplified that story so much by trying to silence the people who were trying to report on it. And that happens almost without fail. And so I do think that there is a benefit to it. And I've known there are people who have come up to me just anecdotally. They've come up to me and they've said, you inspired me to tell the truth in my circumstances and not back down. I had a student recently tell me that they were told they needed to delete a social media post. They refused. One of the people at the university that was trying to coerce them to take the post down had to resign as a result of the whole thing. So the truth ended up prevailing. The student did not face consequences. The staff that were pressuring the student faced the consequences. And so it just takes a backbone. It takes being bold and courageous. The truth will win out in the end, but it needs fierce defenders who are willing to stand up and say what's true. Otherwise, the lie will for now prevail in your circle and spheres of influence, and you will feel that pressure even more. If you want to take that pressure off, you have to be willing to act.
That is a fantastic way for us to end. Thank you so much for being a fierce defender of the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you for inspiring all of us and just, telling us again, we can do this.
Yeah.
You know what? We can be the one.
Yeah.
And we're just really grateful. So on behalf of Kansans for Life, thank you so much for coming into the podcast studio today.
Thank you. Thank you for standing for life.
Yeah. We're blessed to do it. It's a calling, and we're all called to do this. We're called to stand for the truth in whatever sphere of influence we may have.
Yeah.
So whether that's our own family, our own community, our own church, wherever it is, we've got to stand for the truth. And like you said, that's the only way we're going to turn the tide.
Yep.
So thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who are listening today. If you believe the right to life, freedom of speech, and religious liberty are all essential and worth fighting for, and you want to make a difference, please share this podcast with others. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll be notified about future episodes. We've got great conversations coming up. You can stay connected with us by visiting kfl.org and signing up to receive our updates. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok at Kansans for Life. And as we say goodbye, never forget, the pro-life movement is on the right side of history. Truth always wins in the end. We hope you'll join us next time. Thank you.